Hi, I'm Julia and you're watching Code Kitchen. Today we'll be continuing our Tasty Taxes app. If you haven't been following along, I'd highly recommend you start from part 1. First things first, we want to remember the number of times the user clicks on the button, so we're going to put that in an int up here at the top. Now when the button is clicked, we want to increase that number by 1. In Java and most other programming languages, the ++ is a shorter way of adding 1 to the current object. The commented out line and ++ do the same exact thing. In order to calculate how much is owed, we need two values, the cost of each action and the number of times the action was taken. We already have the number of times, so we need to get the cost. We can do that by getting the text from the edit text that has the cost amount. When you get the text, what you're getting is a string when we want a number. I'll make another video later for a quick explanation of all the number types and link it here eventually. We'll just be using an integer for now. In order to get the integer value from a string, you want to invoke the integer class. That class has a method we can use called parseString. Just put the text inside the parentheses as a parameter. Don't forget to capitalize the I in integer. Now that we have both values, we can multiply them in order to get the total amount owed. Then we take that summed value and stick it in the text view using the setText function. Within the setText function, we want a string, so what we're doing is called concatenating the string. It sounds complicated, but it means sticking strings onto the ends of each other, or in this case, a number. Also, sticking strings onto the ends of each other is called appending. Whenever you add a number to a string, that number becomes a string too. That's why this function will accept this int. Tip: in extreme cases of string concatenation, you would want to use a class called stringBuilder, since it is more efficient, but most people most of the time just concatenate it this way. Now if you run it and just hit the button, you'll get an error. But if you put in a number into the cost edit text, you'll be okay and it should work. What's happening here is that the edit text has nothing in it, so when it tries to multiply with a non-existing object, the program crashes. If you go back into the XML and make the text for the cost edit text equal to a number like 10, then that would solve the issue. But we're not going to do that since it would still crash if the user just deletes that number too. Remember our lesson with the breakpoints? We're going to use them here to try and figure out what's up. Place a breakpoint on the first line in our didTheThing function and start the debugger. Click the button when it loads and your debugger should hit the line. Now step over the line slowly until you find the line where it all falls apart. Toast is okay, incrementing is okay. It looks like the parsing line is the problem. Don't be alarmed that you're now looking at new code. This is in some other class that you don't really have to worry about. If you look closely at this line that we've got highlighted, you can see that we've caught an invocation target exception. It sounds fancy, but it's just a type of an exception. There are lots of types of exceptions out there, and I don't remember most of them. All you have to know is that exceptions are bad and cause crashes. Or I guess you could reframe it and say exceptions are good because it tells you what's wrong with the app. If you look even closer, you can see that the E is of type invocation target exception. Step in one more so that now you are within the curly brackets. Now look down here to see what that E is. Click the triangle so it shows you the rest of its insides. Look, another exception. This time it's a number format exception, and it's happening when the string is empty. That's because an empty string isn't a number. It's not even a 0. It's just nothing. If that's confusing, check out my video about the concept of null. So we just found the problem. Go back to our main activity Java file to fix it. Remember that it was at line 46 that we had the problem. So what we're going to do is add a check to make sure that the string isn't empty before we use the line. Tip: strings have a handy function to check for an empty string called isEmpty. You could also check its length to see if it has a length of 0, or use .equals to see if it is equal to an empty string. But isEmpty is the easiest. Now by default, the next line after an if is affected by the if. But to me, that's just going to cause confusion later. You always want to put the curly braces around it so you can see easily what the if block contains. Now if you put the if block here, you can see that it causes the cost per time did variable to have an error and turn red under it. That's because the variable is no longer in the same scope. What we can do is declare it again up here so that the bottom variable knows that it exists. It's not enough to just declare it though. If you mouse over the error, it says it needs to be initialized. We'll just initialize it to 0 or -1 for now. Tip: the better option to choose is -1. Tip: the better option to choose is -1. Whenever you initialize things, you should make it a value that wouldn't otherwise make sense. So if later when you're debugging, you come across that weird value when it shouldn't be weird, you know something went wrong when setting its real value. Now if you run the debugger again and step through it, it at least won't crash. You can also highlight lines and right-click them, and then scroll to the Add to Watches option, and the value will appear in the box at the bottom. You don't have to highlight the whole line. You can also add to watches part of a line to help you figure out what's going on. In our case, we don't want this whole chunk to run unless the user puts in a valid number as the cost. So we'll move the curly brace down here and stick it all in the if block. Now we can say, if it's okay, do the normal stuff. Else, show a toast to the user that they need to do stuff. We can also get rid of this toast up here and stick the whole function inside the if statement, since we don't want the app to do anything unless the user types in a number. 2 tips. Highlighting lines and hitting tab will tab all of the lines, and add space around your logic so it's easier to read. Now that we have everything the same scope again, we don't need to initialize the variable to -1 anymore, but we could keep it if we wanted to. The difference in writing good and bad code is making decisions like that. It's not that a good programmer is smarter than you or anything, it's just that they've written their code so it's easy to follow, easy to debug, and makes sense without doing unnecessary things. Now if you run the app again, it shouldn't crash in that scenario, and your total should go up. This doesn't take into consideration if the user types in letters instead of numbers, and it will probably crash for that, but we won't cover that here. Just be aware that that'll happen. I'll make another video about handling that with regexes later on. You'll notice though that if you set a number, then click the button, and then change the number, and then click the button, the total will change using your new cost value instead of the old one. If you don't want that, like if you want to set the tax to a different number every time, then you can change your algorithm like this. We'll need a variable to hold a total, so we'll stick that up here in another global variable called we owe. Now down here, we'll just add the current cost to the total in we owe. This plus equals and the commented line does the same thing. And then make the amount owed equal to the new we owe. You can make this even more efficient by getting rid of amount owed entirely and just using the new we owe variable, but this is fine. Now if you run it, it should work and total up every new cost as well. The app now works in most scenarios, but it only keeps the data as long as you have the app running. If you close it and open it again, it resets itself. Our next video will cover saving the data to the phone. Know anyone who would find this useful? Share this video with them so they can sharpen their skills and cook up some apps.